Hi everyone, my name is Cari Liebenberg and I'm going to be taking you through this talk today. This talk is titled, How Many Engineers Does It Take to Design an Internal Developer Platform? Or IDP for short. A little bit about me before we get started. I enjoy skating on quad skates. I've been playing roller derby for the past 10-ish years. The past 2 years have been COVID though, so I haven't been playing as much as I like, but I'm trying to get back into it. I also enjoy park skating. And I'm not that great though, but I've recently learned how to drop in and it's a whole different experience for me. I also like to play PlayStation when I'm not working, which is not that often, but yeah, it takes me a long time to finish a game. So I'm still after a year making my way through The Witcher 3. Let's chat a bit about the talk though. What are you going to be hearing about today? Cool. Well, my agenda is, let's start with why would we even want an internal developer platform? From there, let's chat a bit about what is an internal developer platform and some other concepts that can be helpful. And then how can we decide on the right objectives? And then finally, ending it off with an idea for running an internal developer platform design workshop, where I can actually guide teams to design the internal developer platform. And this is where we can apply some design thinking. I'm very lucky. I work with some design thinkers, so they give me some advice for this section. But yeah, I'm very grateful, and I hope the information helps someone else. Cool. Starting with why. Why would we want an internal developer platform? So the best way for me to explain it, I've created this hypothetical company, Amazing Inc. And Amazing Inc. have decided that they would like to migrate to the cloud. They're going to change their business model. They've been working mostly with on-premise data centers, and they now are at a point where this new ideas that they want to implement, new like SRE, for example, they want to really go use a lot of SRE techniques. But in order to implement it the way they'd like, they'd have to rewrite their software anyway. And they've decided, well, if they're at the point where they need to rewrite their software, they might as well rewrite it for the cloud. And so now they're at a cloud migration point. They've also been hearing a lot about internal developer platforms. They've been going to conferences, cloud conferences, and they've been hearing about this concept, and they think it would be great for their company. And so they're at a point where they're hiring now, and they're getting really talented engineers on board to help them with this. But ultimately, they are looking for something to help them make the cloud experience as efficient as possible. Well, I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of a hero, and this is James. He is our platform lead. Our hypothetical company, Amazing Inc., have decided to hire James, who has experience working in a platform team. He is a platform engineer with years of experience, and he's really looking to grow as a leader. And he's really excited. He's keen to join and add to this, to the migration plan of Amazing Inc. And Amazing Inc. is really happy to have him on the team. But like most companies, Amazing Inc. have gone and hired a lot of engineers. They've also invited engineers from the on-premise side to come to the cloud teams if they want to. So any on-premise coders that want to learn about cloud, they've invited them over to the cloud team. And now there's this large platform team of like 20 plus engineers, and James has them hitting the ground running. So James has a good idea of what the platform should look like, because he's worked on a platform before. He hasn't started one from scratch yet, but he has a fair idea of where they're going towards. But pretty soon, James has realized that they've been building technology for the sake of technology. So they're building and building and building, but they're just not really making much progress. They're not really getting teams onboarded to the cloud. They're creating a lot of interesting features for the cloud, but they haven't quite got their ducks in a row in such a way that they can scalably onboard teams to the cloud. And so the obstacles he's come across is that there have been unclear objectives. They're not really that sure of what they're trying to achieve. And there's also been misaligned leadership. So there's a management layer that James has to answer to, but that management layer is not aligned. And they also keep coming up with new ideas and new strategies, and this constant shifting and changing is preventing the team from focusing on anything of real substance. So James is at a point now. He has to rethink the problem. To quote Einstein, we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. James would like to go from the ground up. He really wants to define this problem and solution. So let's start with what is a digital platform. And I'd like to start with ThoughtWorks, their definition of it. A digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. Autonomous delivery teams can make use of the platform to deliver product features at a higher pace with reduced coordination. And so this is an internal product, but you can still use managed services as it, but it's just how it's presented to the company. It's something managed internally that helps to solve internal business needs. And then to also highlight the autonomous delivery teams. What do we mean by this? And so, for example, let's say at the top there, I've got this blue block of internal developer platform. And underneath there, like a representation of an autonomous team and what they might need to achieve. So, for example, they might need CI/CD, they might need continuous delivery. They might need infrastructure on demand, perhaps some networking set up for them so that their solution can be exposed either internally or privately or publicly, depending on what kind of networking they want to set up in different environments. And then they need guidance for security. What kind of security do they need to put in place before they're considered secure? And they also need a clear path to production. What state does their solution need to be in order for them to be considered production ready? And this all needs to be decided for the team so that they can work autonomously and not be stuck by processes that haven't been clearly defined. What is an internal developer platform specifically? So I see the internal developer platform like a very specific implementation of a digital platform. So similar to how SRE is a bit more of a specific way of doing DevOps, internal developer platform is a more specific way of doing a digital platform. It caters for a specific need. If you look at the top there, I've got like a representation of a product team that might want some CI/CD, maybe some secrets management, maybe a way of handling their certificates. Perhaps they want to request subdomains, have log storage, and all of this. If every team had to do this, it would be quite a bit of effort and redundant effort, and also a steep learning curve for each team. And this adds to a lot of cognitive load if they're building all their own services as well as building their application. And so the internal developer platform, if you look at the purple block again, you can move these into like a service catalog that the internal developer platform can then manage, maintain, make reusable, and share with product teams. And then product teams, for example, can focus specifically on delivering value. So they can focus on their application with the ability to utilize these services or look at pre-existing solutions and kind of mimic the pre-existing solutions. So it creates a path for them, a clear path. So James is now excited. He's got a good language going. He's got an idea now of what a digital platform is. He's got an idea of what he wants to do with it and how he wants to create an internal developer platform specifically, and how he's planning on creating effective solutions that decrease the cognitive load of the product teams that need to be able to build the applications they need to build. But let's have a look quick at Conway's law. And this gets brought up a lot, but I'm going to take you through the official definition of Conway's law. Organizations who design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. If you remember, this talk is about designing an internal developer platform. And so we know we want to design a specific structure, like a structure for the internal developer platform. But if we're not careful, we could start to affect how the internal developer platform by having the wrong team structures in place. So this takes us to Team Topologies. A really great book, really recommended. There are these 4 team types: stream-aligned team, enabling team, complicated subsystem team, and platform team. And I've got 3 interaction modes: collaboration, X as a service, and facilitating. The next thing we could chat about now is, okay, if we're aware that Conway's law is a problem, how do we counteract that? So there is this concept of an inverse Conway maneuver. And so the idea is, if we want a specific structure for our software, let's take a look at how we're structuring our teams. And so Team Topologies recommends this approach, the team structures I mentioned, and the interaction modes that were mentioned. And so this is just an example of, you've got like a streamline team with an enabling team, another streamline team, and then the platform team right at the bottom there. And they're interacting with each other with X as a service as the interaction mode. So the next thing James needs is, he needs a little bit more of clarity of what the team needs to achieve. And so James has spoken to the enterprise architecture team and the management team, and he's asked them to collaborate and come up with a business goal. So they've come back to James with, release software daily in a reliable and secure way. And this gives James and his team a really good way of prioritizing what they should be building. And so further, James has collaborated with management, and he said, okay, now we need to come up with our team structure. So using team topologies, what James has done is he's kind of drawn a couple blocks, and he's gotten feedback from everyone, and together in a meeting, they've decided that this is the structure they'd like to follow. Right at the top there, they would like to have a landing zone platform, and this is a team that will manage basically the cloud itself. So make sure that the cloud is at a state where the internal developer platform can use it. So they might manage, let's say, some governing rules. They might handle the initial IAM rules if they're using AWS. Oh, in this context, James has been asked to stick with AWS. So their landing zone, they'll need some accounts set up for the internal developer platform to use, and they've decided that it's for cognitive load and for the efficiency of effort, they'd like to have that as a separate platform. Then below the landing zone platform, you'll see that there's the internal developer platform, and then a block that says other platforms. There could be multiple platforms in the solution. And James is specifically focusing on the internal developer platform. And what he'd like to cater for is right at the bottom, there's the product teams. So the product teams are going to be consuming the internal developer platform services. To the side there, you'll see I've highlighted some enabling teams. James has suggested that there be a SRE enabling team. So the SRE enabling team they kind of specialize and upskill in SRE skills, and then they come into the different teams, platform teams or streamline teams, and they help them understand how they can most effectively implement SRE and kind of get the best strategies going for handling, making their sites reliable ultimately. And then there's an enterprise architecture team, and the enterprise architecture team helps go into the teams as well, kind of enabling them, helps them to understand their architecture. So that the idea is that each team should understand their own architecture and have a architectural diagram of some sort that they can review with the enterprise architecture team, and then make sure they're going in the right direction, but also they feel comfortable to come with suggestions for their architecture. So we're kind of like shifting architecture left, and each domain, so to speak, starts to handle their own architecture. So that's an idea of like an example of how we could use team topologies to map out a bit of a structure for teams so that the internal developer platform can have a path of success. But then James is he knows that they've been kind of working on their platform currently. And I mentioned before that they were he's been getting this feeling that they're building technology for the sake of technology. And they've been working for, let's say, a year, 2 years already, and they haven't really got anyone in production yet. And this is really the key point, is James has realized the missing element is that he needs to get teams into production. And the sooner they can get teams into production, the sooner they'll know if they're going in the right direction or not. And so if we take that methodology and, well, that concept of getting to production sooner rather than later, so don't try to build a perfect system before you go to production. Actually try to get to production while you're building your prototype. And so James is going to use a cloud-native approach of prototyping the concept. So taking engineers from each of these layers, from the platform team, from the internal developer team, and from the product team, he would like to create one core team. And so this is where he's going to start, the core team. This is create a single team of 5 to 8 engineers and architects Team responsibilities will include ownership of the technical vision and architecture. So this slice, shall we say, this vertical slice of functionality is going to go across those three layers or domains, shall we say, of the landing zone functionality, the developer platform functionality, and then the product team as well. And all together in one team, they're going to get the product team to production as soon as possible. And so this is going to be a phased approach. So they're going to start with the POC, where we have the core team and that vertical slice I mentioned. Because they're working together in a single team, it's quick feedback loops, and they're going to be able to find out what is working and what's not working really quick. And the POC should only take like 2 to 4 weeks. Like, it's a very quick amount of effort, and the goal is to get to production. Because once we can see what stands in the way of production, we can solve it. The team can kind of raise the right flags, get the right momentum going. And then from there, after the POC, you split that out. So you take that vertical slice, and remember, we've got now 3 teams kind of working together as one team. Now you split those teams. These teams now know how to work together. They know what they're solving for each other. You split them with a bit more of a unified goal. And now they should be able to work on the next phase of creating things as a service. So kind of to start with, in the POC phase, things aren't as a service yet. You're kind of directly building it for each other. But once you kind of split it out, then you can start to do interaction models and interaction modes of like splitting the teams into their different layers. The teams then can also start to become more autonomous. It's also the solutions. You're now getting towards a point where you're making the solution more mature. You've got that path to production, and you keep iterating over that and streamlining the path to production even more, because in the beginning it's going to be like cumbersome and there's going to be a lot of things to do. But slowly over time, you start to automate it. And then you start to bring SRE into the picture as well. That as teams are splitting out their layers, they can start thinking about how they can implement SRE as they go along and automate more and more. And then I've got their day 1 and day 2, and they're not literally 2 days. It's day 1 is like setting up your systems, making them usable. Day 2 is when you start to maintain it and you start to scale and you start to think long term. And so now when we get to day 2, your teams should still be autonomous. There should still be really great interaction modes between each other. And the path to production should be very clear and pretty streamlined. And SRE should be full blown in the solution. Okay, but there's still something missing. So we spoke about some of the obstacles that James has had to face: unclear objectives and misaligned leadership. So now leadership is a bit more clear for James. Like he's got a story now. He's got a bit of a language around what he's trying to solve. He can kind of pull up, these diagrams we've been going through here. Those are James's diagrams that he's now going to take through to management, and he's going to say, this is the vision, this is what we're trying to achieve. If anyone's not clear, any team is unclear of what they're trying to achieve, he's got those diagrams ready and he can get everyone on the same page. So now there's alignment, but there's still unclear objectives. What are they actually trying to make with the internal developer platform? So James has this idea. He had this epiphany, and he's suggested that the teams need to use this 3-step approach. Starting with the value they want to drive, they're going to need certain requirements in order to achieve that, and then they need to create milestones that will define how they're actually going to implement and achieve the value they want to achieve. So if we take a look at that, that could kind of like be repeated all the way up the stack. So if we look right at the bottom there, it starts with, for example, the end user and then a product team. And the product team, what value are they trying to create? Well, the product team is trying to, let's say, for example, create a web page with some data that it's returning to the user, useful data. And that's going to lead to some requirements. So they might need a database, they might need some networking setup, some Route 53 rules set up so that users can even reach the application. There's going to be certain security requirements that they need to have in place. And then so they can divide all that they need to build, they can divide that into milestones. But those requirements, they throw up the stack to the next team. So they're based on their requirements, what they need, they can go speak to the platform team and they say, okay, we're going to need to request a database. Is that something that we're going to do? Is that something that you're going to do? And then kind of through that approach, they figure out who's responsible for what. And the platform team starts to understand what they can do to add value to the product teams. And the platform team is also realizing that the product team is going to need pipelines. They're going to need a continuous delivery. So the platform can also then start to build those pipelines for them. And so that becomes part of the value that they can add for the product teams. That also becomes part of the milestones that they need to map out. But then also their requirements. So they know they're going to need to be able to request certain access from the cloud. They're going to need certain account structures. And then they go and speak to the landing zone. And they say, these are our requirements. Who's responsible for what? What do you want to handle in this list? And then so they start to understand who is best to handle what layer. Landing zone might say, we don't want to handle the account structures. You can do that, but we do want to initially give you the access to be able to do that. And then we also want to set up some governing policies, possibly, and that's kind of how you'd start to decide who's going to do what. And then also, so that starts to be what the value that landing zone can add for the platform teams. And then they might have their own requirements. And they'll go, okay, well, we need business to approve this. We need business to give us permission to go spend money on the cloud, whatever the requirements are that they might need. But then they also split their work up into milestones. And so it just becomes this layering of value. It's a flow, starting all the way at the bottom where it starts with the product team. Because remember, our goal is to get the product team to production. So we need something of value in production. And then that just bubbles all the way up. So now we know what the platform team needs to do. Now we know what the landing zone needs to do. And that's why also that core team and that thin slice becomes so valuable, because it drives a value all the way up. So everyone is working on something valuable. And then so I'm going to talk a bit more about design thinking in a bit, but also just to kind of bring it up and that thinking of experiment, see what's working, get feedback, and then adjust, so that you're not building huge solutions and then getting to the end and realizing that you're not actually achieving what you're trying to achieve, but constant small iterations, kind of agile as well, of thinking of trying out an idea, seeing if it's working. If it is, keep going, build on it. If it's not, come back, rethink, rediscuss. And also remember, we've got that the business goal that can guide the team a bit more what to prioritize. Yeah, so that kind of gets us to the point where it gets James to the point where now he's solved his obstacles. The objectives are a bit more clear. We know how we're going to achieve what we need to achieve. We've got that flow concept. James now has an idea of explaining James now has an idea of understanding how the team can work on things that are valuable. He's also been able to align leadership because he's got his story together now. He's got these diagrams that clearly explain to everyone kind of what the plan is, and he can kind of get everyone on the same page. So how can we design an IDP? So this brings us to the workshop. So now we're actually at a point where how many engineers does it take to design an internal developer platform? And so, I mean, the answer in this context is the core team, so 6 to 8 engineers. But, there's actually no hard rule. And I don't have a pun either. But the answer in this context is that it's your core team. So your core team is a great place to start with for your internal developer platform design. And just to kind of mention again, that core team, the purpose and the goal is to get that thin slice of business value to production as quick as possible, figure out what works, and then split it out so that you become your different layers. So to start with, the platform design workshop is actually going to be designed by across teams. But you can redo this specifically just with a platform team once they've split out. So let's say we do the core team and we get the product to production. you can then come back and do this design workshop again, specifically just per layer. So this is specifically for the internal developer platform, but each team can kind of do a similar workshop for their layer. And so coming back to design thinking. So James has spoken to his design thinker colleague and gotten some ideas. And he found out about these 3 steps: understand, observe, synthesize. And so starting with understand, what he'd like to do is define the business strategy, and we already have it. Remember, we have that business goal, so that's great. So that's going to help with the workshop. Then collect a list of constraints, and that could be, for example, the company has decided to go with AWS. That becomes like a constraint. There might be certain security requirements or compliance things that they need to be aware of. That all goes under the constraints. Then they need to define the users. So we know that the users for the internal developer platform team is the product team. And we know that for the product team, the users are like the actual end users, the clients that would interact with the software. So it's important to understand at what point are we working with here. We might have multiple users. So for example, because we're working with a core team, we have a collection of users to keep in mind. And then we gather the requirements of the users. So remember the flows mentioned, where it's value, requirements, and then milestones. Those requirements that have been collected, we need those for this workshop. And thankfully, when you're working with the core team, you'll have everyone in the same place to discuss it. But we need to collect those requirements before you get to the workshop. You don't want to get to the workshop and then discuss requirements, because that's going to take up a lot of time. And then we want to define the workshop statement. So this is going to help the workshop, the purpose of the workshop. So the structure of the workshop statement would be redefine X for Y in a world in which constraints. And so an example could be redefine the platform experience for developers in a world in which software delivery needs to be faster but remain secure and compliant. So now let's move on to the second part of the design thinking phase, and that's observe. In this case, what the teams can do is they can go and interview their users. So you've got the list of requirements book, but go and actually interview the users and ask them more. Have a set list of questions you ask everyone, and ask them more about what they need to achieve. And so for example, here I've mentioned product team developers. So that's if we're working with the internal developer platform, you would go and interview the product team. And then from there, all these requirements that have been collected before the workshop, you can divide them up into new, needed, and feasible categories. So you've got the requirements, but then you also more specifically divide them into new, needed, and feasible. And then that gets us to synthesize, the next phase of the design thinking. And this is the actual running of the workshop. This is the chance to realign, catch up on the goals again. What is the business goal? What is the workshop statement? From there, create an architectural diagram of the current state. So chat a bit about what you currently have. What is the system you currently have, and draw it up in blocks. And then discuss all the information that's been gathered. So all the requirements that have been put together, discuss together, and then architect the new platform. So now again, just high-level blocks. It doesn't have to be too detailed, but everyone starts to discuss about, based on priority and the goals, what would you like to build first, and what is the priorities to focus on. And then from there, you can present to users and stakeholders for feedback. And this is really useful because this feedback loop, before you even build anything, you can get an idea of if you're going in the right direction. So it's like, let's say you take 2 days to do this workshop, or 1 day even. You've just got everyone in a room, you've got them aligned, you've got them excited. This is just like a hypothetical outcome. It's very high level. I haven't even gone into many details, but like you can have, by the end of the workshop, the team should have these blocks of ideas and things drawn up, and like squiggles for pipelines, and like ideas of how different, and again, it's a very low cost way of having this discussion and getting everyone aligned of why you want to do that, what the benefit will be. And then you want to come back to those requirements again. So are you solving the requirements with the approach you're suggesting? And Again, because you're starting with this core team, you can decide who is responsible for what of the solution. So when you're at this like very early stage of creating and designing your internal developer platform, it's really a good point to have these discussions, because what I've seen happen at certain clients is that they build this internal developer platform, but there's just no one takes ownership of the full solution from the cloud up through to the product team. So people are taking ownership of what they want to, but not of what's needed. And kind of, if we look again at the goal is to get the product team to production, what's needed to get a product team to production is the solution from the ground up. And so if we create a thin slice of that solution, before we split out to the different teams, we can solve it, have the right conversations, have the right discussions, and then align ourselves for the right internal developer platform structure with the right responsibilities. Yeah, and that's the end of my talk. It was a lot. I did have a pretty intense description for this talk, and I hope I've delivered. I hope this is what you came here for. It's been really interesting mapping out the story, putting all the lessons learned into this talk. This was quite a lot to put together, but like I say, I really enjoyed putting it together. I really hope this helps someone else who might be struggling with a similar issue. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for coming to this talk. Please follow me on Twitter if you want, Cari_ZA. But yeah, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter. And yeah, if you'd like us to work with you, I work for Container Solutions, and we can come help you with your internal developer platform if you'd like. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.